Alrighty, another Saturday up here working on GRW projects. We're working on the 750 again. The smoking out of the turbos has gotten progressively worse to the point where I just need to address it. There's this old saying that if you don't schedule time for your maintenance on your car will schedule it for you. So I'd like to be ahead of that curve. So I bought a set of Mamba stainless steel wastegates. I'm getting ready to tear these turbos apart, get the exhaust housings off, drill them, remove the old wastegates, put the new ones in, weld the pin, put it all back together, and we'll start putting these on the car. All right, I got the first turbo taken apart. And typically if you're gonna tear a turbo down, you wanna kind of mark where the housings are before you remove them from the center assembly. But these are doweled, which is really helpful. So that's kind of nice. So even though I already made marks, once I tore it apart, I realized it's doweled. So a little bit less work on reassembly. And so this is the piece that we're gonna change. It's a pretty common BMW issue. I'm sure other turbo setups have these issues as well. So there's a little bit of play in there. And I figure if I'm already here, these turbos are used, they only have like 40,000 miles on them, but I'm already here. So let's just get the stainless steel wastegate upgrade and redo this. One less thing to worry about. So from what I've been able to gather on YouTube is you want to mark where the wastegate arm is because you have to weld this back on. So you got to mark where that is. And we also have to drill the pin that's been welded in place down here. So I've got to work on drilling that after I cut this off. You basically just sand the weld down on the wastegate arm and it'll separate with a pry bar and some light upward pressure. You pull that out of the housing, and then now what we're going to do is we're going to drill out the weld pin that holds the actual sleeve in place. So I got it chucked up in the drill press. All right, I think we got deep enough because all of a sudden it got really, really hard to drill. This is stainless steel. I'm sure this is just whatever, welding rod they used, but so we're gonna try to press this out now, and if it starts moving, then we shouldn't have to drill anymore. Alrighty, we got it out. Had to make a tool out of a really long bolt, a nut, socket, a couple of washers, and just stuff to space it out. And you just impact it out. You tighten it down with an impact gun, and it pulls the sleeve through. So I've got the replacement sleeve. I've got to chuck it up in the press. You can't really use the same method to draw it back in because the wastegate flapper will not fit with the sleeve pressed all the way in. So I've got this in the freezer here. And what that'll do, it's like the wheel bearing. It's like the wheel bearing that we did for the Apex engineered control arms on the 280ZX. If you let the component sit in the freezer, it being cold, it'll contract. And that being room temperature, it'll stay the same. And so what happens is when that contracts, it makes it, at a microscopic level, it makes it so much easier to press in. And then when it warms up, it increases its interference fit, and then it won't go anywhere. So I'm getting ready to get it chucked up in the press and do that. Alrighty, well I thought we were going to need a press, but actually letting that sleeve sit in the freezer, I was able to actually just put it in most of the way by hand and then tap it the rest of the way, so I'm going to show you. Alright, this one is a little more difficult. This one I didn't freeze as long, so it required a little bit more persuasion, but the other one, it literally slid in and then stopped about here, and I tapped it the rest of the way. So now we just put a roll pin in there and weld it. Alrighty, I forgot to grab the camera after I got the turbos off, but you know, I'll be honest, I'm not really finding anything super conclusive at the moment. I mean, there's a little residue in here, but it honestly doesn't really look much different than the new turbos. And, you know, I'm not sure if the wastegates are rattling as much as the replacement. You know, I think that's about the same. But at least I was proactive, and it's one less thing to worry about since it's a known problem. But I went ahead and pulled the exhaust manifolds off because this is a really common oil leak point, and it looks like I was right. I mean, you cannot see any of this with the turbos on, the manifolds, all of the heat shields, all of this is covered. And so that's actually, that right there, that's the flange for the oil return for the turbos. And apparently this is a really common leak point, and it actually makes people think they have an upper oil pan or rear main leak. You know, I was already 3/4 of the way there, so let's just get it knocked out. And I'm glad I decided to take it apart because I was right, it's leaking. So we're gonna fix that. I'm still not, you know, I really hope that it's the turbos that are smoking, but you know, I did notice when I pulled this manifold off, this is the passenger side, you can see it just looks sooty in there. Now, theoretically, you know, that is the side where like the turbo will sit. So, you know, so maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's dripping down and into the port, you know, because it sits at an angle like that. So that's a possibility. Or I've got the dreaded valve seal issue, and I'm just trying to talk myself out of accepting it. You can see that port is a little greasy, but I mean, it doesn't look terrible. So I'm really hoping that this thing isn't actually burning oil internally. It doesn't behave like it is. It kind of only smokes here and there, especially D-cell, you know, backfiring. And this didn't start until I put the downpipes on, and it started backfiring out of the exhaust on D-cell, which is a pretty frequent killer of turbochargers. So we got low mile turbos we're putting on. I'm just gonna put it all back together, and if it smokes, then well, I guess it's time for a long block, because if you do the math for what it cost me to buy the tool that I'm probably only going to use once unless a bunch of N63 customers start coming here. So all of the tooling, all the time, I'm already 2/3 of the way there to just buy, you know, I want to do timing chains, all that. I'm already there to just buy a long block and be done with it. So we're going to get working on cleaning up. I cleaned up some of the shields. I got the other one just running in the parts washer right now, trying to get soaking. So I'm going to change this flange. I picked up a new flange from Autobahn BMW up the street. So we're going to bolt the whole thing on and clean it up really good and go from there. Okay, so that flange is off. You can see the turbos just dump oil into that. There's a couple of holes that go right back into the engine block. There's 2 O-rings in here. And then there's a seal here, and you can see, it's hard to see on camera, but it is flat. Compared to the replacement, you can see the gasket has some pop to it. And you can't get the gasket by itself, so but the cool thing with BMW is they do this deal where if you buy the O-ring, you get the entire housing and everything for free included in the price of a nominal $60. So yeah, just add that to if you're thinking about buying a used European car. You get to buy assemblies instead of just individual seals. But fortunately, I'm done taking stuff apart, so I can really start putting stuff back together. So I'm gonna get the block cleaned up here, get as much of this grease and oil sopped up as I can, and then we're gonna put the new oil flange on. I'm gonna put all the heat shields on, turbo manifolds, turbos, put it all the way, almost all the way back together, and then I have intakes that I'm going to start fabricating. I am putting X5 forward-facing intake tubes that go into the turbos, and then I'm going to bring the tubing out through here, stick filters in the bumper and all that, and do a nice custom cold air intake setup for this. Alright, I got the oil plate on. I changed the O-ring that holds the oil supply hose assembly to the block, cleaned the inside as best as I could, cleaned up the heat shields. We got the exhaust manifolds back on and torqued. The upper heat shield in place, so I just need to change the little donut O-rings on the manifolds and the install them in the back of the turbos, and we're ready to put the turbos back on. I'm making pretty good time. I'm probably going to be able to start maybe pulling the bumper and seeing what fabrication is going to look like for this intake setup. So, alrighty, I got the turbos back on, and I partially mocked up the X5 intake tubes, and I put the, basically I just cut the little 90-degree elbows off with a bandsaw, and we keep these we keep these weld-on aluminum fittings in 1/2-inch NPT. And so I just drilled out the inside of this bore here a little bit till it slipped in, and I'm gonna epoxy those in tomorrow. But what's gonna happen is by the time I get a 90-degree fitting here, it's gonna sit too high. I'm worried about it hitting the hood. So luckily Summit Racing is right down the street from us. Well, I say right down the street. It's like a 25-minute car ride. So I ordered some 90-degree 1/2-inch NPT to -10 fittings, and I'm going to thread into these little bungs, epoxy them in place where I need them to be, and then that way I can redo the hoses. I'll change probably to either 45s or 120-degree fittings. I haven't decided yet. We'll just have to see how it fits. But so far it's looking promising. I went ahead and pulled off the whole front bumper. I pulled off the fake radiator grill and the shroud and all that, just to see how much room we're working with. And it looks like I can barely squeeze in some 3-inch tubing in there. I'm going to have to kind of dent the sides a little bit to get it to fit through all the way. So I'll figure that one out here in a bit. But so far it's looking pretty promising to get some front-facing intakes into the bumper. You know, so this is where those factory... This is where the factory airbox gets air scavenged through those little things, dumps it, scoops it in from there, through that, and then goes into the underside of the airbox. So we're going to eliminate that whole circuit. I already checked the mass airflow sensor harness is long enough to fit. I've got some fittings, I've got some MAF flanges for the BMWs, and it fits a few other GM ones as well, but that's the correct mass airflow flange for this. It says a Camaro flange, but it's actually GM uses a lot of Bosch OEM components. So yeah, we're gonna get test fitting and fabricating and seeing if we can get some intakes going. Well, it is about 11:15, and I'm calling it a night. I made some progress on the intake setup. I like the way it's shaping out. You can kind of see I've got a tube in there, partially mocked up. So I bought a universal kit on Amazon, just 3-inch piping, you know, with U-bends. And I cut the U-bends in angled sections so I could kind of just fit and maneuver as needed. So it looks promising. I've got to pick up a few fittings from Summit in the morning, and I think I'm going to look at those. I'm also going to look at those things that you cover the air filters with to keep it from getting waterlogged. That's probably going to be a pretty important piece as well. So I'm wrapping it up for the night, and we'll pick back up tomorrow morning. All right, I got an update on the intake so far. I'm really happy with how it's turning out, with the exception of, in good old me being a cheap-ass fashion, I decided to save $10 by buying non-polished aluminum tubing instead of the standard polish kit that I go for, and it welds like absolute shit. So you can kind of see that terrible weld in there. Luckily I have enough like 45s and a couple of other odds and ends laying around the shop, even if it's just used material. I'm going to powder coat it anyways, so I'm not super worried with how it looks, but I am going to try to sand that down a little bit and see if I can get some of the impurities out of it. And if not, I'll just remake the whole piece now that I kind of know what the dimensions need to be. But I went ahead and I was proactive with getting actual polished, decent tubing for up here, because I got to weld the mass airflow flange, which I'm going to locate about here. Got my X5 intake tubes on, and what I had to do here is, this is actually a 3.5 diameter inlet, but if you take a piece of silicone coupler, I cut it down on the bandsaw, it actually fills up the slack and clamps down real nice. So it goes all the way through here. I did have to trim this little bit here. I have the body strut removed right now. That's a secondary concern. Worst case scenario, I can just remake it if I have to. Or modify it, however, make it fit. But so far, like I said, I'm really happy with how it's turning out. So I'm going to get the mass airflow flange welded and then start mocking up the other side. I got to trim these down a little bit and test fit the filters, see how they fit. And then I'm actually going to powder coat all of this. I think we're going to do textured red. I need to just make sure I have textured red. And yeah, so we're going to keep trucking along. Okay, I totally remade that pipe. That came out terribly, so much nicer weld. I've got my mass airflow sensors marked and preliminary mock-up on the intakes with the grill air diverter panel back in, or air shroud, whatever you want to call it. And everything so far looks like it's going to clear. I still haven't put the struts back in, so we're going to see how those fit. I think the next step for me is I'm going to locate the mass airflow flanges, weld them, and do all the finish welding on everything, and then I think I'm pretty much ready to powder coat it and finish putting the rest of the car back together. I still got to do the catch cans. So I had a temporary setup. I actually did that last month, but it wasn't worth filming. It was it went downhill quick. I tried to get everything to clear the factory air boxes, and it just wasn't happening. Looked terrible. It was functional, but it looked terrible. So I'm actually, like, now that I have all this apart, I'm actually going to redo it, and now I can locate the catch cans to probably one for each bank, like here and here, so it has a cleaner, sleeker look. I'm going to get finished up on the mass airflow flanges, and then we're going to weld this whole thing together. Okay, I just got done. I got everything finish welded. I got the matte flanges oriented. I've got them powder coated, and they're baking in the oven. And so I went with a nice textured red. It's going to take a little bit for this thing to get up to temp. So that's all of the charge pipes right now. We're doing an epoxy textured red. So we're waiting for the component temp has to be 375, and then from there we set the timer. We're baking it for 10 minutes. And we talked about this in a previous episode, but you know, we do offer full powder coating here. And so this is kind of what it looks like. It's a mess in here right now because we've been rocking and rolling. It's fully ventilated, so it has a suction system that keeps everything from getting hopefully distributed throughout the whole shop. I think about the only revision I need to make is I need to actually make a fan shroud that dumps it downward, because we're still getting a little bit of airborne powder. It's nowhere near as bad as it used to be. I mean, I was seeing powder at the shipping dock. That's how bad it was when it was circulating through the whole shop before we actually built this room. So that's where we're at on that. But yeah, I'm just waiting for the powder to bake there. And then I've also got the X5 intake tubes. I got the bungs epoxied. I went ahead and located my 90-degree fittings. I'm just waiting for the epoxy to dry while we wait for the charge pipes to bake. And I can actually put it all the way back together now. All right, we have cold air intakes and catch cans. So this is going to be version 2 of my prototype. Initially, I had a Y fitting that splits the vacuum signal out of the valve cover and split it across both catch cans. And then I also had check valves that would close under boost and transition to pre-turbo suction. But I wasn't really happy with it, and it wasn't drawing enough vacuum on the crankcase through the cans, because the cans also had a massive hose going to the intake tubes, and there was no check valve like factory setup. So I split it up this time. I've got one catch can with vacuum coming out of the lower port of the valve cover, sucking PCV out of the top port of the valve cover, and then on that side I have both pre-turbo suction hoses going to the catch can, and then I have the can pulling on this side on the left-hand bank. All the data I've been able to find on these PCV systems has been for like the non-technical N63. So there's very little information on the first technical update of the N63. I was able to track down some dealer like training manuals. I read through those, and from my understanding, the way it works is there's a cyclone baffle type system inside this cylinder head. It's actually attached to the valve cover, and the cylinder head itself actually has vacuum ports in the intake runners that feed to that cyclone, which is supposed to separate oil, keep it from getting sucked in the intake. So there's no like actual dedicated intake manifold vacuum source for the PCV system on this. So I had to kind of do a lot of research and improvise. So this is version 2. I'm going to see how well it does coupled with these new turbos. And I'm almost ready to start it up. Yeah, I'm going to do a first start and kind of make sure nothing pours out fluid-wise and see how it runs. Oh, here goes nothing. Well, I got a misfire, so we're gonna see what that is. Alright, I just got done road testing it, got it up to operating temp. The misfire was just hell, I don't know, it's a BMW. I cleared all the trouble codes, and then it had a little bit of a rough idle after that. So I actually learned the hard way from the injector fiasco, and I used my factory ISTA scanner, and I cleared the adaptive learning values. And after that, any of the drivability stuff that it was doing went away. So yeah, so that's how it looks completed. I got the PCV system finalized, so I'm just gonna roll with that, see how it does for the next week or so. You know, keep checking the catch cans, making sure it's actually picking up oil. You know, just monitor things, because like I said, this is kind of a new experimental setup I'm going with, but I did verify the crankshaft is getting pulled under vacuum now. I should still be good with crankcase vacuum, or crankcase ventilation with the turbos pulling, so we'll, you know, I'll make sure that I keep checking that can to make sure that oil vapor is actually still getting in it. So if you're going to be doing a set of these intakes, you know, I don't know if I'm going to offer these for sale, because it's not 100% OE fit like I like. You know, it does require modifying the vehicle quite a bit, but I guess if I get enough interest, you know, like the Lexus community, maybe we'll make a small production run. But if you decide to go with X5 intake tubes, this charge pipe hose hits a little bit and kind of tweaks the boot, so I gotta figure out what I'm gonna do about that. I may see if I can take this apart and maybe weld it with a slightly upward angle. You know, I don't know, I gotta play around with it. Of course, you delete all the factory air boxes. You have to modify the PCV system. This hose also doesn't clear the fuel vapor hose for the purge system, so I just snipped it and ran some vacuum hose over that for now. I may try to fabricate an actual nice proper hose. I've got to find all the materials for it. I showed you earlier where you had to trim in the bumper. None of the body struts fit now, so I'll probably just make my own out of some plate steel later on or something. You know, for these two, and then the ones down there, but honestly, I don't think it's a huge deal. So this is what happens when you get lazy and decide to just cook everything with the pistons in. And it's really because this, me personally, was my first time powder coating, and I let the oven get too hot. If it wasn't for that, these would have been done already. So yeah, there's that. Alright, I'm finally messing with the calipers. I had to track down the caliper seal kit on eBay. It's a Brembo part number, but I was able to track one down for the caliper that popped out, or the piston that popped out. So I've got my new G11 calipers on. So you have to shim the calipers. There's lots of forum posts about it. So I found the correct shims you need online. Found the shims you need to space it this way a little bit. So these new upgraded pads, like M550 pads basically, you see how far these slide in. Well, these hit, and so let me show you how far they stick out. Sean's back there messing with some suspension stuff. So you can see this hits the wheel hub, and that's because on the G series and up, this bolt pattern goes back down to 5x114, and this car's 5x120, so it hits a little bit. So what I did is we machined, I say machined, the pad with a hole saw in the drill press and took enough material out. I'm sure there are already going to be people screaming online, but if you knew how brake pads were made, you'd realize that this is perfectly fine. So yeah, you can see how much material we had to cut out. So I didn't want to just grind away at it, and it takes forever to chop it on the bandsaw. So what I actually did is I used a hole saw bit and cut all this off on the drill press, and then I just snipped these little flat pieces on the bandsaw. So now that I have a working template, I'm going to transfer this over to my fancy EBC pads. But you can see this is actually further in than it needs to go. With the pins driven in to hold the pads in place, they sit about here. So that way I still have some contact patch further up. I'm going to go cut some more pads now, and I'll show you all video of that here in a sec. I already checked the wheel clearance. It clears with the new caliper. So I'm going to get this side assembled, and then I'm going to work on getting my brake line transferred over, and then we'll do the other side. So we got some EBC yellow stuff pads. I'm just going to line up. This is really hard to do behind the camera. But we're just going to line these up exactly where they need to go. We're going to scribe a line to designate how much material needs to be removed. We only have to do 2 of the 4. And just a note, this is my personal car. This is not a customer car. I don't know that we would ever sell this conversion to a customer, just because, I mean, we'll see how it goes. Like, I'm willing to do this on my personal vehicle because I'm a mechanic. And if something goes wrong, I know how to address it, especially on the road where you do this for somebody that's unsuspecting and you don't know the full repercussions of a failure. You get somebody killed. So yeah, we're gonna roll with that, see what happens. Okay, here's to hoping we don't scrap a $300 set of EBC brake pads. Well, here we are, 2 modified brake pads. Let's take them over to the car, see how they look. Alright, I had to add one more shim to the caliper. So, despite what the information on the internet says, you need a thick washer and 1/2 the size of that, which I have a bunch of, thanks to Apex Engineered. And yeah, it fits right in. You can see kind of what the clearance is going to look like. With the pins engaged, it's going to be far enough away from the rotor hat and ride perfectly. I didn't get a shot of this before it rained, but you can kind of see it's a little shinier. I bought Caleb a set of Powertrix coilovers for his Z31 in exchange for paint correction and ceramic coating. When he dropped it off at my house this weekend, this thing was like flawless. Well, flawless compared to what I'm used to, but it looked amazing. So, but also give you a look on the wheel fitment with the M550 calipers or G series calipers, which I'm pretty psyched about. It definitely stops a lot better. Now I got to do the rears. It's definitely worth the upgrade. I mean, I already had warp rotors when I bought the car, so that was already a problem I knew I was going to have to fix. But yeah, they look way better inside the wheel. Stops better, behaves better. So I'm very pleased with them so far. And they're very reactive. Like if you slam on the brakes, like it will put your teeth into the dash. If you're looking at doing the G-Series calipers on your F01, F02, F10, I think those three platforms are identical. You can basically follow what I just did. I'll put some links down in the description below for the particular pieces that you need in order to complete this. And update on the turbo and smoking situation. So far so good on that. The smoking went away after a couple of days. I mean, the mufflers were pretty saturated in it. I did see a few plumes of smoke and it made me a little nervous, but it's actually like totally gone away at this point. Intakes have been also doing really great. The catch cans have been doing really well. I've been checking those, and you know, they're actually capturing oil like they're supposed to. I still haven't cleaned up the bracketry. I'm gonna actually come up with a nice like mounting system for that. But yeah, so far, you know, these fittings with the epoxy have held up to the heat. Overall, I'm very satisfied with everything and how it turned out. Intakes have been doing great. Driven in the rain a few times, haven't had any issues. And when I was driving in the rain, it was at highway speeds. If you're watching this and you think this is something you might be interested in buying, you know, if we can get enough interest, we will offer these intakes up for sale. I just got to come up with a way to template these properly. You know, if you're watching this video and you are interested in nice powder-coated front-facing intakes, you know, we'd offer them with the modified boots and everything for your PCV system, catch cans, all that. Just basically the working setup that we have. Let us know in the comments if this is something you're interested in. Alright, we got the GT-R in for maintenance. Already pulled the lower hose off for the cooling system service. Got most of these splash shields down. This thing, it was a northern car, so it's got some rusted fasteners. There's a couple that broke off, but overall, it's not terrible. I've seen worse. So we're pulling the pan right now. It looks pretty decent inside. I'm not seeing any major metal shavings or anything. There's always metal on the magnet, which is why we go ahead and pull the pan. You know, a lot of transmission fluid service people won't pull the pan. I always pull them because I want to see exactly what's going on inside there. And honestly, for what you pay for a transmission service, unless it's in a restricted spot, you should almost always default to pulling the pan. So we're doing that. I still got to do the rear diff. Already did the spark plugs. We're going to powder coat her intake plenum. She said she wanted to go with gloss red, so we're going to do that in gloss red. And yeah, we're just trucking along with it. I got the pan back on, cleaned everything out from inside of it. I cleaned the magnet. No metal chunks or shaving, so that's always a plus. So we're just filling it with Motul DCT fluid, which is significantly cheaper than the OEM fluid, which, in case you're wondering, Nissan Motorsports, they use Motul for their fluids. So we're just slowly filling the transmission with fresh fluid. I can't start it today because I'm waiting on a couple of gaskets for the plenum. And Ryan's working on sandblasting it right now, and then we're going to powder coat it. But I've got other stuff to move on to. I can do the front and rear diffs. I can check for the fuel leak upstairs. So we're just going to let it drain until we get 1 drip per second, and that's pretty much it. Alright, there's our fully assembled, freshly powder coated plenum. Looks pretty dope. Hopefully she'll be happy with it. If not, we'll film another video of us redoing it. Alright, well, I guess it's time to road test it to make sure it behaves, and I still gotta isolate a fuel leak that we're smelling in the cabin, so. I'll show y'all what I found. So I already tucked this in, but this was actually pulled all the way out and just piss poor quality job. It's kind of scary that somebody was fortunate enough to have worked on a GT-R and they did a shitbag job like this, so. Oh my god. Yeah, and it looks like the wiring's already burnt. That is terrible. I don't even know how we would fix that other than like, yeah, they didn't use any like fuel safe stuff at all. We may have to like redo the whole thing. Like, I don't know. Dude, that's bad.
I'm sure there's someone that makes it.
To be continued on that. Well, that pretty much wraps it up for our first GT-R. It only took 6 years in business to get one, but now I really want one. So just to recap, we did spark plugs, powder coated plenum, we did a dual clutch transmission service, front and rear differentials, brake flush, and we cleaned the intake filters and looked for a fuel leak. And so we're gonna like I said, we're gonna reschedule her for front rotors and fix that fuel leak maybe sometime next week, and then she'll be good for a while.
We are just about done with the BRE Tribute Car here. I spent the last day or so replacing the harmonic balancer way down there. Let me see if I can find it. The original one, I didn't notice at first, but Chris noticed that it was basically falling off the car. So since it was falling off the car, the woodruff key is excessively damaged, as you can see, which isn't very good. It's not what you want. So we put a new key in it. The crank was not perfect, but we put a new key in it, put a new crank pulley on it. But yeah, car good. Put a new balancer on it. You're supposed to use the installer tool that he provides. We had a different balancer tool here, but it worked just as good. Put it in the oven over there for, it took a while because the part's very heavy. I had it set to like 200 degrees. Put it in there for, I don't know, maybe 20-25 minutes, and the part was maybe like 150 degrees. And once it was warmed up, the tolerances are a little wider, so I just slid it on there, and it was all good. Car good. It made a bad noise at first from the crank pulley like rattling around. That noise is gone. Popped the valve cover off, did a valve adjustment. We also had to mess with the airflow meter because this car just felt dog slow. If you floor it, and it just wouldn't move out of its own way. So I determined that it didn't have enough fuel because I put on another airflow meter that was on a different car, and that airflow meter made a big difference. The car woke up quite a bit, so I popped that cover off. There was a write-up on how to give it more fuel or lean it out for more fuel economy. Just pop that cover off there and started messing with it. So I gave it more fuel, runs similar to what it did with the other original airflow meter on it from a different car. So I didn't do too much, just a little adjustment made a big difference. And after the valve adjustment, doing that, car woke up a lot. Definitely is pretty good now. Guy wants his air conditioning to work, so I get to run around the car chasing stuff like this, just random vacuum lines going nowhere to make his air conditioner work. So, woohoo! It's another day working on these. Overall, it's a pretty solid car. You might say 240Z on the hood, but it's not. The door's locked. is a 280Z, but it's a pretty nice car. I don't know when the paint job was done, but pretty solid.
And we're finally doing Mike Nguyen's engine swap. It's giving you trouble?
Well, I'm trying to get it like actually straight.
Oh.
Because I figured I might as well put that in the car.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's no reason not to.
Yeah. Got the old motor out, found a buyer for it. New motor in. We'll do a mega squirt. Get the key, see what happens. I got shifter bushings for you. So Mike Nguyen's car. Freshly powder coated valve cover. J pipe. I still need to talk to him about the I still need to talk to him about the block off plates because we're not sure if he's going to want to stick with the green that came on this.
All right, so this is actual progress over here. This is what progress looks like.
We got the cylinder head back this morning.
Got the cylinder head back this morning.
It's like 3 o'clock.
It's gonna go room today.
I don't know about
Look
today.
at the fuel system.
I mean, I kind of could today, yeah.
I watch you put coolant in it, and it's just gonna.
Leaks coolant again through the head. This is a different head, though. This is a new head. Head?
Yep. Mr. Johnson has a new N47 head instead of the N42 that was on the car. Because the N42 head was bad.
It was very corroded.
Very bad. Very corroded.
We tried to save it, but...
Yeah, Chris can splice in a pick. I don't know where the old head is, but
yeah, we
there
have
was a giant hole in the coolant passage.
Yeah, this coolant passage, like right here.
Yeah, that one. So, that was fun.
And we didn't know until we took it apart.
Update on Mr. Johnson's. So the cylinder head that we repaired just didn't take. And what was going on was when we got the cylinder head torqued down, the weld area would crack, even though you saw on the video that I really took out as much material as I could to start over fresh, cleaned it up really well, and it just wasn't holding. And so what was happening is I had, we got the engine through a couple of heat cycles, and Bo was checking the valve clearance, and we were seeing coolant weep out of this head stud, which was really weird. So I had him pull the stud, and we could see coolant actively leaking out of it, so we pulled the head back off. And it's really hard to see on camera. I don't know how this is going to look to you guys, but there's a little microscopic crack that is forming, and it was only there once we torqued the head down. So, pulled the head back off, I cleaned it up, I re-welded it, except this time I welded it solid, because I figure that we normally plug these off in the engine block anyways. It's just a thermostat bypass hole. So I welded it solid, and I had them machine it down again, but one of the previous weld areas that I repaired was starting to flake away, because every time you weld to it, you have to take just that much more material off. And so when this started happening, and we already saw this weld starting to crack again, I was like, man, we just need to call it. So as much as we tried to save the head, it just wasn't feasible. And it wasn't going to be good for the customer to keep taking it apart, trying to machine it down, and just throwing money and time at a problem that the head was just too far gone. This thing was severely corroded. So luckily I had an N47 head in stock, which is not ideal. Same compression, slightly different combustion chamber design, and it has the exhaust liners, but this is just an NA, with some bolt-ons, nothing fancy. He's never going to be running boost through it. So we rebuilt a N47 head for him. I told him I would cover the labor to swap and the machining costs, just buy the head off of me. So we did all that, and now it's been running and driving, and we're just tuning it now. We'll talk more about it in next month's vlog. For now, this is at least to just kind of give you an informational update on what was going on with Mr. Johnson's. We're closing out February here, And we're slowly chipping away at some of these cars. We did quite a bit on Piñas. We did a lot of the interior stuff. We put some of the skillered pieces in finally. He took the seats to get them reupholstered. So the seats have been reupholstered. We've been just chipping away at interior pieces, door seals, weather seals. We have the skillered center console to put in, the radio, AC panel, all that to fit in. I gotta wash it again because it's filthy. And then Johnson's, his is finally running with the replacement cylinder head. We ended up putting an N47 in it, just what I had on the shelf. And so it's running, not leaking coolant anymore, just waiting for me to wash it and then tune it. GT-R, we got the new front rotors on, but we haven't driven it very far because this side, you know, you probably remember from the other video posts that when we did the transmission and all the other services, it was rusted underneath. Well, one of the middle caliper bolt was seized and we couldn't get it to back out without breaking. So we had two options, a used spindle for about $600-700 or a new one from the dealer for $1,800. So she opted for a used one. So that's here, we just got to get it swapped in. We got the wing installed. From the pictures we sent her, she's happy with it, but we'll let her get a final look at it when she comes and picks up. And we'll set the rake for her. I'm still waiting to hear from AAM on what's going to happen with the fuel pump hat. Apparently the kit we have is 10 years old minimum. So Mike that I spoke to over there is working on getting me a adaptation kit to where we can put new parts and mix and match with what's already on the vehicle so we don't have to buy the entire kit. This one got dropped off for an engine, so we're going to be doing that next week. And yeah, that's pretty much... You guys are getting ready to start moving cars. In the January vlog, I had talked about bringing on a new hire, and so Jackson's working with us now. So if you guys are calling in, most likely you're going to be talking to Jackson, and that's allowed me to be out in the shop getting a lot of this work knocked out. So we got quite a bit accomplished the last 3 weeks since I've been able to be in the shop at least 3 days a week. Well, that pretty much wraps it up for February. Short month, but it's leap year, so we only lose 2 days instead of 1. We certainly appreciate you guys watching. We're getting closer and closer to getting monetized. The last step we have is an average of 4,000 watched hours, and with the last video we uploaded, we're crossing over into about the 2,700s now. We appreciate you guys subscribing, liking our videos, watching them, sending them to your friends. Please keep it up, help us get monetized. As always, don't forget to check out our Amazon store. We're continually adding stuff to it. And thanks again. We appreciate you guys.